This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
China's most important political gathering kicked off this week when both the country's top legislature and top political advisory body began their meetings where they chart China's path for the year. Known as the Two Sessions, the 2018 Assembly is one of the most highly anticipated in recent years. As China edges closer to the goal of eliminating poverty and completing the building of a prosperous society in all respects by 2020, the world is watching developments closely, especially the continent of Africa. So what is the relevance of these meetings to a continent on the other side of the world? And what lessons can Africa take away from China's Two Sessions? I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. Now, China's economy is at a pivotal period as it transforms its model for growth with structural improvements and a shift to new growth drivers. CGTN reporter Su Yuting spoke with NPC deputies about their insights on China's economic development.
China has set its goal for GDP growth at around 6.5%. Premier Li Keqiang said the target will enable China to achieve relatively full employment. The country is striving for higher quality, more efficient, fairer and more sustainable development in recent years. NPC deputies believe the country's future development will gain momentum from the government's new policies.
Now, the principal contradiction facing Chinese society is between unbalanced and inadequate development and the people's ever-growing needs for a better life. All our work is for the people. Premier Li Keqiang was applauded several times when he mentioned issues that concern the people. The government will ensure people's lives keep getting better along with the country's economic development.
I think the main targets indicated that China has become more confident in boosting its economic development. The country has set the surveyed urban unemployment rate within 5.5%. And the government work report also mentioned efforts in 3 critical battles against potential risk, poverty, and pollution. Those battles are significant for achieving a decisive victory in building a moderately prosperous society in all respects.
Since a few years ago, we already have the new normal, right? Which is instead of having the very high speed growth like 10%, 12%, we're now going towards like 6-point-something%. But I think that's perfectly okay because we're moving really from a high speed growth to a moderate but more inclusive growth and a more sustainable growth.
China's contribution to global economic growth has exceeded 30%. New policies will be taken to strengthen supply-side structural reform. Many believe the world's second largest economy is set to unleash tremendous potential on a global scale. Su Yuting, CGTN, at the Great Hall of People in Beijing.
Well, CGTN reporter Jane Keo raised a question about China's position towards Africa during a press conference with Foreign Minister Wang Yi. Foreign Minister Wang Yi said the friendship between China and Africa will remain unbreakable. China will step up efforts to help promote Africa's development.
Morning, Minister Wang. I'm with CGTN, that's China Global Television Network. Now, in 2018, for the very first time in 12 years, the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation will once again be hosted by China right here in Beijing. Now, what outcome do you expect from that summit? Also, Mr. Minister, the world is evolving, so is China. But one thing that seems to remain unchanged for China, at least, is the importance it attaches to Africa's concerns and interests. And I'm kind of wondering how China stays true to its policy on honesty and amicability towards Africa in the new era. Thank you.
祝贺CGTN 取得的积极的这些进展。
Congratulations to the CGTN on your success. General Secretary Xi Jinping once made a powerful statement. China and Africa are friends tested by adversity. Such friends must never be forgotten. So be assured, no matter how the world may change, or what others might say, the profound friendship between China and Africa will remain unbreakable, and China's promise of sincerity, real results, friendship, and good faith will remain true. As Africa's brother and partner, China will always attach particular importance to the needs and interests of African countries. Africa's concerns are China's concerns. Africa's priorities are China's priorities. Africa faces the twin challenges of maintaining peace and security and of promoting development and revitalization. In response to its needs, China will step up mediation in regional flashpoints, as well as cooperation with African countries on unconventional security threats, such as terrorism, piracy, and natural disaster, and help them build capacity for ensuring their own peace and security. Africa is an indispensable partner in our effort to build a global community with a shared future. China welcomes our African brothers and sisters to get on board its fast train of development. The FOCAC summit, scheduled for September, will bring together Chinese and African leaders again, 12 years after their last gathering in Beijing. They will discuss China-Africa cooperation in the new era and focus on jointly advancing the Belt and Road Initiative and turning China and Africa into a community with a shared future. By aligning the Belt and Road Initiative with the UN's 2030 Agenda, the AU's Agenda 2063, and the development strategies of individual African countries, we will give wings to China-Africa cooperation to help it soar to greater heights. Thank you.
Many people on the continent are keenly watching the developments from China's two sessions. Analysts are weighing in on how new policies will impact on relations with Africa. Here are some views from across the continent.
It should take interest because an annual meeting of any place is worth paying attention to, because they might come up with policies that would affect the country. There may be a few statements here and there saying how they can interact with other countries, and then that's where Africa comes in. Where is Africa placed in the discussion, the two-session discussions about China's engagement with other countries? So in that sense, then people in Africa, particularly policymakers, need to pay attention to whatever may be going on there, and then see how it might relate to individual countries.
Africa trades with China, all right? How will you not monitor what is happening at the level of the meeting of an NPC of the type of the Chinese? You must see what they are discussing in terms of policy measures. Are they taking measures that are likely to be inimical to the interests of your country? So you must monitor.
We are seeing more and more countries looking towards protectionism when it comes to global trade. And I totally respect the fact that we are now looking as Egyptians to be part of the BRICS. We are now looking at being part of the One Belt and One Road initiative that China has undertaken. So it is that sense of globalization that we really respect. Free market economics has become a highlight of China as well under his leadership. I believe that his leadership has made a change and will continue to make a change in global trade.
Africa certainly is very much in the hearts of the Chinese people, and Africa certainly is one of the priorities of Chinese foreign policy and economic development. I'm sure that with the development of the country, China is going to invest more in Africa. China would be more involved in peace and security of the continent, and I'm sure that there will be new announcements, new programs and projects coming out of after the summit.
We're going to take a short break now, but when we come back, we'll have more insights into the lessons Africa can take away from China's two sessions. Do stay with us.
China Global Television Network. From broadcast centers in Beijing, Washington, and Nairobi. A unique global perspective. 6 channels and a video content service. News when you want it and where you want it. On TV screens, websites, mobile platforms, and social media. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Talk Africa. And now to offer more insights into China's 2 sessions and the lessons that Africa can take from them, I have expert guests standing by in Beijing. Hannah Wanjie Ryder, she's the CEO of Development Reimagined. In Johannesburg, Dr. David Monyai, he's a co-director at the University of Johannesburg Confucius Institute. And with me in Nairobi, Professor Michael Shege, he's a professor of public policy and international development at the University of Nairobi. Welcome to Talk Africa. Now, Hannah, let me start off with you because you're monitoring all this, of course, from Beijing. Now, the 13th National People's Congress opened this week. Premier Li Keqiang laid out plans for the year as he delivered his annual work report. From his speech and from your view, though, what were the key highlights from that?
Well, the government so far has confirmed the growth projections for China. They have delivered, they've talked about how China has been becoming more of an innovation economy, as well as trying to address the structural imbalances in the country, as in reducing the amount of manufacturing in the country while still maintaining growth. And they're also talking about how they have helped people to lift themselves out of poverty, over 12 million this year, 12 million people, which is really continuing a very positive trajectory in terms of planning to get to zero poverty in rural areas by 2020. So they're on track for most of their targets that they have set, and everything effectively sounds very positive from here.
Right. Dr. Monyai, particularly its relevance for Africa, what were your takeaways?
There are a number of takeaways. Firstly, it's a policy conference of some sort. It gives a great deal of certainty, certainty and direction in terms of Africans and the AU in particular to look and providing stability at a global level, understanding China quite fully in terms of its move from this year and next year. And this provides a chance in terms of engaging, understanding exactly the economic policies within China, how it's handling with challenges it's on domestically in China, as well as its move on key areas, particularly the One Belt, One Road, and dealing with a number of issues from climate to other areas that are affecting Africa, such as peacekeeping, stability at the global level, given the fact that Western countries appear to be moving away from the process of globalization.
Right. Professor Shege, your take.
I think from the political side of things, the biggest lesson we're taking from China, from my point of view as a scholar, has to be sustaining economic growth. They're talking about 6.5% growth rate in 618. Over a period of over 30 years or so.
Right.
And a period in which poverty levels in China have fallen tremendously, much faster than any other country in the world. These are lessons that we could get from, and I think they are continuing in the National People's Congress, that momentum which came with Deng Xiaoping in 1980. China opened up its economy not just to domestic investors and entrepreneurs, but also to investors global-wide, worldwide, using export platforms in places like Shanghai, on the Coast Belt, to manufacture, first of all, cheap consumer goods for the Western world. You get people employed through opening up the economy that is producing to the global market. But you complement that with training your own people. These young people that we have in Africa need serious training so that as jobs become available from the global engagement, they are able to work and get in. It's called the demographic dividend in economics, because there they are, they need training, but you also need a place for them to be placed. If you look inwards to your economy, which is what most African countries have done, you're going to destroy yourself. Open up, export, bring foreign investment, use your own investors, create opportunities. That is a lesson that I see that we can learn from China.
Right. Hannah, in that respect, though, there were a few policies that do resonate with Africa here, and Professor Shege has mentioned the poverty alleviation being one of the top priorities for the Chinese government. Of course, China says it did spend 280 billion yuan in the last 5 years fighting poverty, and that most people now, about 68 million actually, are now out of poverty. So what policies exactly made this achievable?
Well, you see, China has, I've written about this before, China has changed its poverty reduction policies over time. At the beginning, when China started its journey towards to try to help, when the government began to try to help lift people out of poverty, it was a broad economic development strategy, and this is what effectively many African governments are looking to also bring into their own countries through industrialization, manufacturing, etc. But as poverty has become, as the poverty thresholds have increased, the poverty itself, the fewer and fewer people are in poverty, the government has shifted to have a more targeted strategy. So what it's doing now is focusing on specific regions. It has specific counties that it prioritizes, and the government actually provides cash transfers and so on, and specific assistance for health and so on, even for people with disabilities and so on. Much more targeting now, and of course that is much more expensive per person. It becomes much harder to reach these people. But this is the law of diminishing marginal returns for any economists out there. The more you try to do something, the difficult it gets.
Let's see how this can resonate with Africa, because Dr. Munyai, you have heard the poverty alleviation programs put in place by China. What aspects of this strategy do you think Africa can adapt to?
China has set it a goal of wiping out poverty by 2020. It's such an ambitious program which resonates well with the African continent, with massive unemployment and massive poverty, lack of infrastructure. And therefore, I think as Africans watch Chinese deal with their own internal issues concerning to poverty, I think there are a lot of lessons. Obviously, the environments are different, the Chinese environment as well as the African. There are certain peculiarities which are African. It's a question of how Africans can adopt some of the lessons from China, how to advance quality, inclusive growth, and do it at a time not at the expense of the environment, and a number of other keys which China is suffering from. And as we can see, when it comes to the climate change, we are being affected by changes in global climate, and China has made massive inroads in dealing with the climate as far as in Beijing and all other cities. You can see improvement in their environment, and I think Africa would learn a great deal provided all African countries really take note of what's happening in China.
Dr. Munyai, your take on this, though, is Africa becoming one of those destinations where Chinese companies are moving their manufacturing enterprises to now, or is there still a big challenge?
I think there are quite a number of movements in terms of Chinese investments in key areas, in tourism, manufacturing, as well as in industry, big. What Africa requires is policy direction. I think if you have a policy that deals with corruption, China is dealing well with catching tigers and flies. And I think Africans could also deal with corruption quite decisively and ensure that they open up clear infrastructure to allow bulk water, electricity, enough energy, and you also could do the issue of green energy. I think there is a need for real serious thinking, improve the education in Africa as well as skills, working closely with China and other partners to ensure that as most of certain manufacturing industry move away from China, coming to Africa, all policy as well as the environment is conducive for Africa to take off at that level.
Right. Hannah, there are two events that, or two issues that have also been mentioned as being of particular significance for Africa in 2018. Now, China's foreign minister during his press conference talked about Africa getting on board with Chinese fast development, the Belt and Road Initiative being one of them, and the upcoming Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. Could you give us an indication as to just how much importance China is attaching to these two significant issues, particularly in relation to Africa?
Yes, well, this was a really, really good news to hear from the foreign minister today, that and many African countries and ambassadors who I've been speaking to have been mentioning this for a good amount of months so far, that really the integration of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, which has been going on since 2000, it will be its 18th year this year, and also the Belt and Road Initiative, which was initiated in 2013. Now, in the past, even in the last FOCAC, which was in 2015 in South Africa, there was uncertainty as to really, is Africa included within the Belt and Road Initiative? And of course, the Chinese authorities said, yes, any country that wants to join can join, and several African countries did come to the Belt and Road Forum, the Belt and Road Summit last year, but this will now be a formal link in September. That said, in terms of whether that will actually bring some real benefits to African countries, I think there's a lot that can be done from the Chinese side. My colleagues in the panel have mentioned the importance of what African countries can do, but you know, Africa at the moment, even with the Belt and Road, with some of the countries already included in the Belt and Road, it still makes a very small proportion of the foreign direct investment. So we really want to, it's important for the African governments to also push on several levels, trade, investment, on the loans and debt issue as well, which came up, to really push for their interests as much as they can, and in partnership with the African Union, to make sure that that summit really does make a difference at the bottom line, at the ground level.
Dr. Munyai, do you see Africa being much on the uptake when it comes to the Belt and Road Initiative? Because now there are 26 other countries in that, though, but are there synergies in this for African countries today?
The number of challenges that the Belt and Road Initiative is confronting. I think Kenya, if you look at Kenya, what it has done, I think have achieved quite a lot, as well as Djibouti, Ethiopia. But the entire initiative needs to move far from not Only East Africa, but go Central Africa as well as Southern Africa. You cannot have a successful One Belt, One Road, the Africa dimension, without South Africa, for instance, without Angola, without strong involvement of Egypt, Algeria. And there is a need to ensure that all these efforts and initiatives are coordinated at the AE level to ensure that it is in sync with Africa's own Agenda 2063. The biggest challenge is that China is well organized, well ahead, deep pockets. When it comes to Africa, it's fragmented, and all the planning as well as execution of all these initiatives, it's happening at a member state level, and at times in contradiction with what the AU wants to see happening on the African continent. So the question of coordination and ensure that all this is in line with Africa's own move, it's quite critical, and one hopes that the FECOC in Beijing this year, African leaders will take this and ensure that it is done widely across the entire continent.
Professor Shege, of course, $60 billion was pledged to Africa's projects in 2015 during the last FOCAC summit. Where are we on those projects? I
think the problem with African countries is that we are not planning well ahead to how to utilize this 60 billion. China is presenting a big pot of money, but their position has always been, you come up with what your priorities are because we respect them. We are not going to do what Western countries and the World Bank and IMF do and select your priorities for you. That's the position, in so many words. I don't see a lot of consistency in our countries in planning consistently over time about where they are and where they want to go. The funding is available. I think it's a good thing, but our countries have to plan what they want to do with that money. I think I see a lot of emphasis on infrastructure, and that's good. But remember this, an awful lot of the trade that goes on between China and Africa is raw material based. Oil and minerals are the biggest commodity that we exchange. If you really want to go into manufacturing, then you have to engage the Chinese manufacturing companies, state companies, seriously, and prepare the groundwork for them so that they can come here and manufacture. So they can move from a raw material exchange system into one that is going to manufacturing, employment generation, housing, water, electricity, and so on. Yeah.
Right, Hannah, we will get your final comment here. So how will any new policies coming out of these two sessions, though, how will that impact relations with Africa in 2018?
Well, I think it's, in particular, the Forum on Africa-China Cooperation announcement, the inclusion into the Belt and Road Summit. It's pretty important for the African countries to get themselves ready to take to try and get the most out of their China relationship, and equally, hopefully, the Chinese government will be open to proposals as to how they can continue to support the African continent and in as positive and constructive a way as possible.
Dr. Munyai, your take, how do you see this impacting relations with Africa in 2018?
I think the relationship, the state of the relationship is strong. I think moving forward, there is a need of stability at African countries level. One, you need stability to ensure that the involvement of China is not politicized, as the case in most countries, where one regime changes plans with instability on the ground. There is a need for peace and security to ensure that all these massive injections of resources and loans are done in a way that is sustainable. I think there are concerns in some quarters that Africans might not be planning well. And the AU and the regional economic communities, as well as member states, need to coordinate and move forward to ensure that Africans gain more as far as dealing with the unemployment, dealing with poverty, and learning from China, ensure more investment benefits people on the ground and not politicians.
Right, Professor Chege, briefly.
The litmus test is going to be the next FOCAC. We wait for the Forum of Africa-China Economic Cooperation. We're going to see what the African countries are going to table at the FOCAC. We'll see whether there's been more thinking, more reflection, more planning, and better ideas into how to utilize this cooperation between us and China. I'm hoping that African countries are following the Congress, and that they're looking at opportunities in China that can enhance the cooperation between us between now and 2018.
Professor Chege, we leave it there for the moment, and that's all we have time for this week. But thank you to my guests for their insights. In Beijing, Hannah Wanjie-Ryder, she's the CEO of Development Reimagined. In Johannesburg, Dr. David Munyai, co-director at the University of Johannesburg Confucius Institute. And with me in Nairobi, Professor Michael Chege, Professor of Public Policy and International Development at the University of Nairobi here in Kenya. Do remember you can join the conversation online through Facebook, Twitter and YouTube, and do tune in again next week for more Talk Africa. From me, Beatrice Marshall, it's goodbye.